what's up? Sanisa, Super Bad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this, the second leg of our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with Esparza versus Ortiz. Marlyn Esparza, the reigning WBC flyweight champion, against Annabelle Ortiz, the former WBA minimum weight champion who traveled 2 divisions north for this fight. Traveled 2 divisions north of the minimum weight division where she normally campaigns to challenge Marlyn at flyweight.
Annabelle's a little smaller than Marlyn.
A little older, a little slower. She's a non-puncher.
She wasn't a big puncher at minimum weight, so she's really not going to be a big puncher at flyweight.
In truth, Marlyn Esparza isn't a big puncher either. Marlyn Esparza's bread and butter really is her boxing, and it was her boxing, her clean, polished boxing that won her this fight. She was able to effectively use her height, use her reach, use her boxing to manage the distance comfortably, placing shots and getting safely out of range.
Straight punches, in and out.
Good variety on the shots, even if there wasn't much mustard on them. Not enough mustard to stop the very experienced, albeit...
I mean, listen, Marlyn Esparza's a good boxer, but she's no knockout puncher.
These boxers that come from deep amateur backgrounds, they have to try and transition from an amateur point style to a pro style that's more geared towards inflicting damage. Though for Marlyn Esparza, it's clear that she's no artillery fighter. She's no gunslinger. She just ain't got that God-given power that some other boxers have. Power, much like speed, athleticism, and reflexes, is a physical attribute, not necessarily a skill. Power is one of those things to where either you got it or you don't. Unfortunately for Marlyn, she ain't got power, but she makes up for it with textbook boxing skill, fundamentals, very good ones, that allowed her to win a clear points decision against a much more experienced professional boxer than herself, a former champion. If Marlyn Esparza is to unify in the coming year, in 2022, the saving grace for her is that the Argentinian champions, Leonela Paula Judica, Deborah Ana E. Lopez, they're not big punchers either.
She's not under much threat of being knocked out by either of those champions.
See, out of the 4 champions in the women's flyweight division, the biggest puncher among them would have to be Japan's own Naoko Fujioka, who showed she's still got it to some degree against Sule Murbina, who's a lot younger than she is. Out of the 4 world champions at this weight, the biggest puncher among them really is Naoko Fujioka. So that's basically saying that if Marlyn Esparza goes into that fight with Judica, or she goes into that fight with Lopez, tries to unify with either one of them, it's going to go to the cards.
And it's going to come down to the boxing.
Marlyn Esparza has the necessary skills and the pedigree to potentially outpoint either Leonela Judica or Deborah Ana E. Lopez.
That's something to think about moving forward.
We then come to the co-main event, to the main event of that same card. The title fight between Cecilia Estrada, the reigning champion, and Maria Santizo, the challenger, who a lot of people didn't know a whole lot about, aside from she has an unbeaten record.
A riveting fight from start to finish.
A fight that very much entertained the crowd for as long as the fight lasted, though the fight didn't last very long. It lasted all of 4 rounds, and for at least two of those 4 rounds, Maria Santizo, I'll tell you something, she didn't look out of place.
All right.
She didn't look like she didn't belong. For those first 2 rounds, she was getting through with some hard shots
all right.
here and there in the heat of the exchange, though more often than not, it was Cecilia Estrada that got the better end of the exchanges, was the more accurate fighter in the fight, beating Maria Santizo to the punch, even though Maria, I reiterate, for at least those first 2 rounds, she didn't look out of place. It was in rounds 3 and 4.
That's where Cecilia Estrada separated herself.
Cecilia Estrada landed a massive chopping left hand that descended on Maria Santizo's face in the heat of the exchange as they were trading, scoring the very first knockdown of the fight.
The difference in speed between them was nominal.
Marginal. It was for this reason that Maria Santizo was actually having some success in spots, small pockets, getting through with shots here and there. But those shots she was getting through with seemed to have...
Cecilia got fucking pissed.
You often hear it said that Terrence Crawford is a guy who's got a dog in him. That some instances, the worst thing that can happen for the man opposite the ring is for the man opposite the ring to get off a hard shot, because once he does, Terrence Crawford's going to be really switched on. And the same rings true for Cecilia Estrada. If you watch this fight that only lasted 4 rounds, whenever Maria Santizo got through with something, Cecilia Estrada made sure to get that back.
Cecilia showed a little bit of everything yesterday.
Head and body shots, a bit of switch hitting, that's right. Cecilia Estrada is athletically gifted and fundamentally gifted. She can fight as an orthodox fighter, she can fight as a southpaw, and we saw that yesterday, switching seamlessly between the two.
Cecilia showed a little bit of everything yesterday.
Mixing in body shots, well-placed body shots into her combinations on the tail end of them.
It was the head punches that finished Santizo.
What I liked about this fight, what I really liked about this fight, was the placement of the fight, where it was on the card. This was the co-main event to the main event, so all those latecomers that are likely coming in to see Zerto, they got to see Cecilia Estrada in action right before that, in what was a non-stop action fight between two fighters who were really going to go for it, really go at it. And there was a bit of back and forth. Maria Centizo did have some success, nominal success, that did not prove to be long-lasting. Better still, there was enough action and enough punches being thrown from both fighters that it was very entertaining, very engaging, and every time Cecilia Estrada scored a knockdown, you heard the crowd roar.
We're thoroughly entertained.
And Cecilia Estrada, you have a quality operator that has the fundamentals to win a points decision with her boxing, but has enough dog in her, is a big enough competitor that they'll go for the knockout if the knockout is there, and you don't have to ask them to do it. They know what opportunities are there to capitalize on. Beautiful knockdowns, beautiful knockouts.
Excellent fucking showing for Cecilia Estrada.
We then come to the main event of that same card, and don't misunderstand me. This was a thoroughly entertaining action fight between two guys who are in a very similar place, compete at a very similar level. Zerto Ramirez and Uniesky Gonzalez. I have to say that as far as action fights go, back and forth action, both guys being stunned throughout the course of the fight, both guys hurting the other man, it was very much fun to watch.
But for me, this fight is proof that Zerto is no boogeyman.
Zerto Ramirez is not so concussive a puncher and so strong a finisher. Zerto is not so supremely skilled that the likes of Dimitri Bivol or really anybody else at light heavyweight has to avoid him, has to run from him. This fight, at least to me, is proof that Zerto Ramirez and the idea that Dimitri Bivol is avoiding him,
That's a lot of bullshit.
it's not even that this was a lackluster showing for Zerto Ramirez. He did prove that he can compete at a certain level by taking out Uniesky Gonzalez by way of technical knockout in the 10th round after hurting Uniesky several times throughout the course of the fight, though failing to finish him sooner than later, being hurt throughout the course of the fight as well, being stunned by Uniesky Gonzalez. I mean, I look at Zerto and I ask, does this guy have better feet than Dimitri Bivol?
No.
Is he a better boxer than Dimitri?
No.
Is he a bigger puncher? What does he have?
I'll tell you the truth, I'm not seeing it.
Zerto is a solid light heavyweight who faced his first semi-solid light heavyweight opponent in his light heavyweight campaign, and we saw that
Ought to have better beef would stop this guy.
Dimitri Bivol could very well hurt him, or at minimum, outpoint him. Zerto Ramirez's best bet to win a title at this weight would have to be the WBO title from Joe Smith Jr., who at this time is preoccupied, and he's going to be preoccupied for the next two fights. He's got to fight Callum Johnson, and if he beats Callum, he's got to fight Anthony Yard.
He called out Dimitri Bivol after the fight.
Something about there being nowhere to run and nowhere to hide or checkmate, one thing or another. I'm not against Zerto getting that Dimitri Bivol fight, I'm not.
But according to Eddie Hearn, that fight was already offered to him and he turned it down.
So where do you get that Dimitri Bivol's running from this guy? I just don't get it. I look at their skill sets, I look at their respective resumes, what they've done so far, and Dimitri Bivol has a better resume, has fought more notoriable fighters, solid ones, than Zerto has, even though he has far less fights than Zerto does.
Zerto means southpaw in Spanish.
Because Gilberto Ramirez, more well known as Zerto Ramirez, fights out of the southpaw stance, and he's very statuesque. He's got a lot of height, he's got a lot of reach, big frame, even as far as light heavyweights go, though he doesn't use it. He's not a stick and move long distance fighter that fights behind a long stiff jab. Zerto Ramirez is more of a mid-range to inside puncher.
Yeah, he's more of an inside fighter.
Doesn't have the fastest feet, though. Doesn't have the fastest hands. Dimitri Bivol, comparatively, is an outside fighter. Great set of legs, great jab, great accuracy that can effectively stick and move for the full course of a championship boxing match. He can stick and move for the full 12 rounds. And he's got a beard, he's got a chin. He took a really hard shot from Joe Smith Jr. well over a year ago, and he absorbed the shot, didn't go down.
He's not going to crumble off the first hard shot that lands.
This wouldn't be the first statuesque light heavyweight with a big frame that Dimitri Bivol has faced before. Craig Richards, Lennon Castillo, those are statuesque light heavyweights, the same as Zerto.
Solid ones, too.
I just don't get where all of a sudden this guy's supposed to be a boogeyman. I thoroughly enjoyed the Uniesky Gonzalez fight. Good back and forth action from both guys, mid-range to inside. Most of the fight was fought in the pocket. Zerto hurt Uniesky at times. At times, Uniesky hurt Zerto, though ultimately it was Zerto that emerged the victor. And that's all well and good. If it brings us closer to a Bivol versus Ramirez fight, I'm not against it.
I won't lie to you, I wasn't overly impressed with what I saw from Zerto.
Wasn't impressed with what I saw in terms of hand speed or foot speed. Wasn't impressed with what I saw in terms of variety. He pretty much kept throwing the same combination throughout because Uniesky Gonzalez
He's no defensive wizard.
didn't see a lot of body shots from Zerto, even though those body shots were there for him if he wanted them. Didn't see him throw a lot of uppercuts. He just kept throwing the same combination, and because Uniesky's no defensive wizard, the combinations landed. Golden Boy Promotions cards are usually a lot of fun. They really are. And this fight was no exception. It was definitely a fun fight to watch. There was great back and forth action. Oscar was very involved. He was there ringside.
Golden Boy knows how to throw a party.
Though I have to address this narrative I've been seeing as of late, that Zerto Ramirez has all of a sudden become a boogeyman. When and how did that happen?
If they can make that fight next year, then make the fight next year.
By way of the WBA, Zerto Ramirez is in a pole position to challenge Dimitri Bivol for that WBA title, more so than any other contender in their ranked standings. That's all well and good. I'm not against it. Just don't sell me this dream that there's something in Zerto Ramirez for Bivol to have to avoid. I ain't buying it. Finally, my reaction to the big news that broke late yesterday. I'm sure most of you have heard by now, per tweet from Michael Benson. WBA President Gilberto Mendoza has revealed that Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas has now been approved as a 3-belt WBA, WBC, and IBF welterweight unification fight and will take place next as Ugas mandatory, a Montestanionis, has agreed to step aside. With that, Errol Spence Jr. has gone on to say that he's doing all the heavy lifting.
Heavy drinking is more like it.
Boxing scribe Jake Donovan stated, best news of the night. Not this fight, but WBA President Gilberto Mendoza here at ringside has confirmed that a Montestanionis has agreed to step aside for the mandatory title fight, paving the way for Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas 3-belt unification fight in 2022, 1Q.
What's so great about it?
Is the Ugas fight supposed to be just as big as the Crawford fight? Is Yordenis Ugas the guy that fight fans have been asking Errol Spence Jr. to fight for the last 3, going on 4 years?
No, he isn't.
And what is Yordenis Ugas' claim to fame? Fighting a very past-it, over-the-hill Manny Pacquiao?
Jeff Horn did that way before Ugas.
Except Manny Pacquiao was younger and more active when he did it. Terrence Crawford subsequently went on to stop him, beat him easy.
The Spence fans are very happy about this.
Many of them have gone on to say that the reason they were proponents of this fight to begin with is because what they want is for Errol Spence Jr. to fight in a tune-up fight of sorts ahead of what could be a Crawford fight. I guess they view Yordenis Ugas as a tune-up kind of guy if you're classifying this as a tune-up kind of fight. I guess you don't view Ugas as being as dangerous as Terrence Crawford. And that's all well and good. I don't view Ugas as being as dangerous as Terrence either. The difference is, I picked Terrence Crawford to beat Errol Spence Jr. long before the car accident. Car accident or no car accident? Tune-up fight or no tune-up fight? If it makes these guys feel better, feel safer, that Errol Spence Jr. is facing Ugas instead of Crawford, more power to them.
I wasn't expecting Errol Spence Jr. to find his balls.
I wasn't expecting this very basic fighter, this basic southpaw, who may very well be in haphazard condition, to finally find his balls and fight Terrence Crawford. Half expected that behind the scenes, clandestine efforts were being made to ensure that Spence versus Ugas happens, and that's where we are.
From the moment the WBA ordered that 4-man tournament,
Yordenis Ugas has been moaning and groaning by way of social media, belly aching online, all the while, behind the scenes, Errol Spence Jr. and his team, coupled with the powers that be, they were working clandestinely to try to get a Montestanionis off of Ugas' back, the WBA as well, and they have succeeded. I'm not surprised that they managed to wriggle out of this situation and weasel out.
Be honest, were you actually expecting Errol to fight Terrence next?
All fun and fuckery aside, I wasn't expecting Errol to find his balls. I wasn't actually expecting that he would fight Terrence Crawford next. I was just pointing out.
I was just pointing that out, that there are no barriers now, but he's still not trying to make the fight.
No barriers, no obstacles, no sides of the street to hamper the situation and hinder the fight's progress, and still, Errol Spence Jr. chooses to fight someone else.
Like he's been doing for the last 3 or 4 years.
And this is going to be billed as a pay-per-view. It seems that most of what Fox has in store for their fight fans, what fight fans remain, it seems that most of what they have in store for them are pay-per-views. Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz, Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios, Spence versus Ugas.
You guys better start saving your loose change.
You PBC fans, you've got a very expensive 2022 coming up. Early next month, we're going to see Charles Martin versus Luis Ortiz on pay-per-view. Later on that same month, we're going to see Keith Thurman versus Mario Barrios. Later on in the year, you're supposed to be paying for Spence versus Ugas, and you've got to decide if you want to buy all that stuff.
Because if you don't buy it, that hurts Al Heyman.
That hurts the PBC every time one of you Dream Stream guys, you Fire Stick guys, Fire Stick Committee, decide to steal one of their fights as opposed to paying for them. They're not marquee fighters if their market value is being
hampered by piracy.
Don't fucking sit there and try to tell me how great all of these fights are if even you aren't paying for them. If the PBC's critics and the PBC's fans have the same thing in common,
But neither of them are buying these fights.
then what does that tell you about these fights? What does that tell you? Does the Yordenis Ugas fight have the potential to be more commercially successful than Errol Spence Jr.'s last fight with Danny Garcia? Danny Garcia, who comparatively has more of a profile with the boxing fans than Ugas does.
Don't use the pandemic as an excuse for the buy rate, because those UFC pay-per-views were selling.
Can Spence versus Ugas do better in the box office than Spence versus Danny Garcia did? Danny Garcia, who has been in there with more familiar faces, more familiar names than Ugas has comparatively. Amir Khan, Lucas Mathise, Keith Thurman, Sean Porter. More recently, though not all that recent, Errol Spence Jr. And that fight did what it did. It didn't crack 300,000. Errol Spence Jr.'s numbers are down since he first debuted on pay-per-view against Mikey Garcia. The Danny Garcia fight didn't do the box office what that first pay-per-view did.
Can this fight do better?
Ugas is coming off of that career best win over Manny Pacquiao. A quasi-retired, 2 years inactive, 40-some-odd-year-old Manny Pacquiao is the best win on Yordenis Ugas' resume. And when that's the best win on your resume,
Errol's been out over a year.
that is, he will have been out inactive for over a year's time the night of this fight. What kind of momentum do either of these guys have? What kind of excitement have they generated in the year of 2021 that in 2022, this pay-per-view will be more successful than the Danny Garcia fight was?
Pacquiao versus Ugas numbers weren't nothing to write home about, you know.
And how do we know that Errol Spence Jr.'s detached retina, just that entire situation, how do we know that that won't rear its ugly head in preparation for this fight in 2022? Because that's what costed him all of this year, after all. That detached retina. That's why he didn't fight.
Not exactly on stable ground, is he?
Because even if he makes it to the fight devoid of injury, that eye is still an issue. That is a target for Yordenis Ugas.
This guy got injured in sparring, so what's going to happen to him under the hot lights?